What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we are going to be breaking down the fight between Ben Askren and Jake Paul from a betting perspective. Now from the very beginning of this video it's very important for me to make it clear that we are going to be talking about this matchup from a betting point of view, because who you think is more likely to win a fight isn't necessarily always the best bet. And I know that can be a difficult concept to understand, but don't worry, I'm going to do my best to explain it in this video. And if you do like me making content on fights that aren't related to the UFC, if you want me to cover more of these big fights, please hit the like button below to show me that you appreciate these kind of videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. So let's jump right into it. First of all, by taking a look at the odds. So at the moment we've got Jake Paul as a relatively big favourite. You know, the odds range from about 1.50 up to about 1.55, which is minus 182 for an implied probability of 65%. So what this implied probability means is that you need to give Jake Paul better than a 65% chance of winning in order to get value in these odds. The bookies disguise the probability that they give an outcome of playing out by giving you odds, but by calculating the implied probability we can see how confident the bookies are that Jake Paul's going to win. And what this implied probability says to us is that the bookies think Jake Paul's got about a 65% chance of winning. If you feel more confident than that, if you think Jake Paul has got a 70% chance of winning, 80% chance of winning. I've seen some guys in my live streams this week tell me that Askren has got no chance of winning and Jake Paul is 100% going to knock him out, then you'd find a very, very good deal in these odds and you would be betting Jake Paul because the bookies only give him a 65% chance of winning. But if we take a look at the odds on Ben Askren, he is currently floating around about an average of 2.60, which is going to be plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. So if you give Ben Askren a better than 38% chance of winning this fight, you should be betting Ben Askren, because that means you've got a great deal. If you believe the bookies are roughly accurate in the way they've set their odds, 65% in favour of Jake Paul, if you feel that's reasonable, if you feel Askren's got about a 38% chance of winning, you should probably pass here because there's no value in these odds. But I personally believe that there is a good opportunity, not necessarily to make money, because when we place bets, we don't know if they're going to win or not, right? We're just looking for strong positions to put our cash to give us the best chance of making a profit long term. I don't know how this fight is going to play out, but based on all the stuff that I'm going to share with you in this video, I do believe that there is a very good bet on this fight. I also want to let you guys know that throughout this video we're going to be including a lot of clips from different fights, different interviews and stuff, and the YouTube copyright algorithm is crazy aggressive. So if any sections of this video get cut out, I do apologize. I should be able to use them under the fair use copyright laws, but as you know, YouTube is a little bit crazy. So if you want the full video here, if any parts of this get cut out, head over to my website, link in the description below, MMABettingTips.com. I'll post the full video on there. So obviously I make a living from betting MMA. I don't have a lot of experience with betting boxing just because MMA takes up a lot of my time. However, I am very familiar with Ben Askren's career. I've obviously watched all of Jake Paul's fights. It doesn't take very long. He's only had 3 fights. And I have been making money from betting on MMA for 12 years now. I've been watching combat sports for 20 years. I've got a decent amount of experience to, assess this fight, cap it, and work out, if there's a strong position to put my money on this matchup. And like I say, I have bet this fight and I'll be sharing that bet with you in this video. So when we look at this matchup, there seems to be very much divided opinion on how this fight is going to play out. There seems to be 2 different camps, and if I play a clip to you from the great Dana White summarizes pretty much how the 2 different camps feel going into this matchup. So just listen to this.
Jake Paul isn't a fucking boxer. This guy's a fucking YouTube kid.
But he's gonna bring
I went
35
up there
million
and I
people to
watched
watch
him. He be working hard though, Dana.
I believe
Dana,
that he's a great fighter.
He be working hard. I watch him. I watched him. I see him. I see them put it together.
Zab. No bullshit.
I'm just saying. I
no
seen him.
No.
I watch him.
No bullshit. You're hanging out with the kid you know him. You know
saying,
whatever.
yeah.
So you're saying he can fight.
Yes.
All right. There you go. Zab Judah said he can fight.
That is a very broad question.
But who can he fight?
Right. When you say fight,
Wait a minute.
can he fight?
No, wait.
Fuck
Look,
yeah, he
can
can
this
fight.
fucking guy fight over here with the camera?
Yes, he can fight. Yes, he can fight. You know what I'm saying?
Can this kid fight?
Now, can he fight Mike Tyson? This is a different
we
story.
ain't saying Mike Tyson. Can this kid fight? Listen, I get it. You're in a bad position right now because you hang out with the kid, you know him at the gym and shit. You don't want to shit all over the kid.
No.
Can this kid fight?
Dana, one thing about me, you know, I shoot straight shit.
Can he fight?
The boy can fight.
So let me tell you about this kid. So the kid that he's going to fight is a wrestler, you know, a real good wrestler, decorated wrestler, but he's actually fought real guys. He's been a world champion in other organizations in MMA.
It's gonna be an interesting test.
Yeah,
for
but
him,
it's different though, Dana. When you standing up and you know from wrestling and standing up and let him hand fly. One thing I can't say about him, he got hands.
Yeah,
he got hands. I'm not joking. He got hands.
I'll
He's
take
very
it.
exciting, but I want to see him fight again.
Yeah, I want to see him fight again.
I know. Me
let's
too.
Go.
I'm interested too.
Yeah. So
he talks a lot of shit.
Oh man, he
Well,
does. That's why he got like 75 million views that watches him every time he goes on.
They watch him. They're not watching for no reason.
We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out here pretty soon.
Yeah. Now
Let me tell you what. I hope you can bet on this thing because I'll bet $1 million
Oh, here we
that
go.
he loses this fucking fight.
Dana White.
Bet $1 million that he loses this fight.
$1 million.
So I hope we can bet on this.
I love this guy, Paul. This guy, look, he got his millions of bucks out here. It's beautiful.
Dana's not playing.
All right, so Zab Judah and Dana White representing the two popular opinions that people have coming into this matchup, right? People are split very much down the middle with this matchup. They either agree with Zab Judah and they've looked at how sharp Jake Paul looked in his last two fights against Anis Gibb and also against Nate Robinson, and they're weighing Jake Paul's skills, the work that he's been doing to learn and train boxing over the last 3 years very highly. You know, a lot of high-level boxing coaches, you know, high-level boxers have said very complimentary things about Jake Paul's skills in the boxing ring, and they're weighing that very, very heavily. People within the sport, Zab Judah, for example, you know, is taking Jake Paul's capabilities very, very seriously. And then you've got the other camp who look at Jake Paul as being this, you know, kid that lives in Beverly Hills, very, very comfortable lifestyle, but he's young, he's athletic, he's strong, he's powerful. He's fought some guys that aren't that skilled, but they don't believe Jake Paul's going to have anywhere near as much success when he starts to face real fighters like Ben Askren. And when you look at both those different camps, we're going to take a look at, you know, the merit to both of those camps, those different arguments. Then we're going to try and basically weigh up how much validity there is to those two arguments. And at the end of this all, we're going to consider, you know, the perspective that both camps are coming from, those that are backing Askren, those that are backing Jake Paul. Weigh up all the information we've got available to us and try and make the best decision here and see if there's a bet on the table. This is the process I work through when I'm trying to find strong positions to put my money, when I'm trying to find good bets. This is the exact process that I work through. I look through all possible outcomes, I look at the odds, and then I see what the most likely outcomes are to see if I'm getting a good risk to reward ratio in betting on either of the fighters, but I try not to put myself in either camp. So when we look at Ben Askren, one of the narratives is that this guy can't box, this guy can't throw a punch, this guy's striking is terrible, and he's not going to be able to defend himself in there against Jake Paul, who's been taking boxing very seriously. He's going to get lit up like a Christmas tree and get knocked out, just like Nate Robinson, just like Anis Gibb. I've got to be honest with you, I am very, 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 very skeptical as to whether Ben Askren's striking in a boxing match is going to be anywhere near as bad as Askren's boxing in MMA fights. I completely agree with you guys. Askren hasn't really shown us any striking capability in his 21 fights, you know, in MMA. However, we haven't really seen Askren take that much damage in MMA either, or put in really bad situations. Of course, later on when he got into the UFC, he struggled against Robbie Lawler, obviously knocked out against Jorge Masvidal. But, you know, in his time in Bellator, in his time in ONE, he fought very, very, very dangerous opponents like Andrei Koreshkov, Douglas Lima, Alex Sakin, Luis Santos, and for the most part wasn't really in that much danger against any of those guys. So I understand boxing striking is very difficult to MMA striking, and Askren's clinch and grappling and the threat of his grappling made it easier for him to defend himself in MMA fights. But you've also got to consider how much higher level strikers guys like Douglas Lima, Luis Santos, Alex Sakin are going to be compared to a guy like Jake Paul that's only been training in MMA, or in boxing, sorry, for 3 years. And this picture is a very, very interesting picture to me. We've got Sergio Pettis winning the RFA title back in 2013. He's with Duke Roufus and Anthony Pettis, as well as Ben Askren, a very young-looking Ben Askren. And this picture is very, very significant because it shows how long Ben Askren was working at Roufus Sport under Duke Roufus. This is a very, very significant picture because this shows that Ben Askren has been training under Duke Roufus for 8 years. Duke Roufus is a predominantly kickboxing coach, right? Doesn't really coach any grappling. If we look at the majority of guys that come out of Roufus Sport, you know, you think of some of the fighters in the UFC at the moment, Gerald Meerschaert, Jordan Griffin, Anthony Pettis. You look at, even guys in the past like Mike Rhodes is training Ben Askren in the past. You look at these Roufus Sport guys, and the one thing they've all got in common is pretty bad takedown defense, not the best on the ground. And that's predominantly because Duke Roufus used to be a kickboxer. He's a kickboxing coach, and all his training focuses on striking. Ben Askren trained under Duke Roufus for 8 years, at least 8 years. This is the oldest picture I could find. And what that says to me is that Askren went to train under Duke Roufus to get as much striking experience and improve his striking as much as possible. Now, I know guys like Paul Felder, who trained at Roufus Sport for a while with Ben Askren, have come out and said, Ben Askren would never spar. He would never spend that much time striking. But if you do anything for 8 years, if you immerse yourself in something for 8 years and surround yourself with something for 8 years, you're going to absorb a lot of knowledge. You're going to become relatively good at it. And so I find it very, very hard to believe that Ben Askren would have trained under such a high-level striking coach for 8 years and not learned how to strike. It's very, very different, being in an MMA fight and setting out your stance and striking with the view to actually tie your opponent and take them down, as opposed to actually, being in a contest where all you can do is strike and your sole focus is on striking. Askren wasn't trying to punch guys in the face and outstrike him. He was trying to close the distance, tie him up, and take them down. So we haven't really seen Askren put in a position where he's forced to showcase his striking. And I'd be really surprised if Askren's striking was as bad as people think it is, because you don't develop, no striking skills at all, no boxing, training under a fantastic coach like Duke Roufus for 8 years. So that narrative is very interesting to me. And of course, some footage surfaced this week with Ben Askren, after open workout, doing some drills with Mike Rhodes, who's obviously trained at Roufus Sport for a very long time as well. And Ben Askren's hands look a lot sharper than they have in the past. I know this footage has scared a few people that have already bet on Jake Paul, because obviously the old sparring footage, the old training footage that came out of Ben Askren, showed very, very low-level boxing. I know that Vidal Riley, when he was on the True Geordies podcast, was kind of making fun of Askren for how bad he looked on the pads. But again, training footage, it doesn't really tell the whole story. And surely a guy like Ben Askren, training at a predominantly striking-based gym in Roufus Sport for 8 to 9 years, is going to absorb a lot of knowledge. He's going to develop a relatively decent level of striking. And I believe that the skills that Askren learned at Roufus Sport enabled him to use that striking knowledge in reverse to defend himself against dangerous strikers in MMA. Because like I say, prior to getting into trouble against Robbie Lawler and Jorge Masvidal, Askren had done a pretty good job of defending himself his entire career and not taking too much damage. So I believe he learned all the stuff, or he took all the stuff that he learned from Duke Roufus and used it in reverse, right? It's like when a striker, develops, reasonably good wrestling, but instead of using their wrestling to take their opponent down. They use their wrestling in reverse to defend takedowns and keep the fight standing, where they can outstrike their opponent. It's very, very possible Askren is a semi-decent striker, but he used that striking in reverse to defend himself. And now, against Jake Paul this weekend, for the first time ever, we're going to see what Askren can do offensively. So this is a really, really interesting situation, because people are assessing Askren's technical ability when it comes to striking on, you know, footage of his pad work, you know, things old training partners have said to him, and his MMA fights. But for me, Askren's striking is pretty much an unknown. What I would say is Askren's a smart guy, seems to have a great work ethic, and I'd be very surprised if he trained under Duke Roufus for as long as he has and not developed some kind of striking skills. So that is obviously, you know, one of the big narratives, right? Askren's got no skills, won't be able to defend himself, and Jake Paul, who's looked very, very sharp in his last 2 boxing fights, is going to box his face off. The other narrative, you know, the group of people that are giving Jake Paul absolutely no credit for the things that he's achieved over the last 3 years. They're giving him no credit for knocking out Robinson and Anise and Gibb on the basis that they weren't fighters, right? And as a result, you know, they refuse to accept that a rich kid, you know, living in Beverly Hills, a very, very comfortable lifestyle, can come in and beat a legit fighter in Ben Askren, a guy that's had over 20 pro MMA fights. You know, he's an Olympian. You know, he's had an entire lifetime involved in the combat sports world. You know, multiple promotion world champion in Bellator and won. They cannot see how this guy, Jake Paul, that, like I say, lives in Beverly Hills, very, very comfortable lifestyle, could possibly cause this guy a problem. And, you know, again, I do think this kind of thinking is a little bit flawed, because when you look at the Paul brothers, they were very athletic. You know, Logan Paul in particular was a very good, you know, wrestler at high school wrestling level. You know, even Ben Askren on Logan Paul's podcast gave Logan props for the things that he was able to achieve when it came to wrestling. And you've got to remember that even though, you know, Jake Paul is this cocky, brash young kid that likes to drive nice cars, wear nice clothes, Jake Paul hasn't got to where he is by being gifted his success or by coming up with a silver spoon in his mouth. You know, both Logan and Jake came from very humble beginnings where they grew up in Ohio, and they've had to work for everything that they've achieved. It hasn't come easy to them. You know, they have grafted and built their empires on YouTube from absolutely nothing. You know, that isn't luck. The only way you achieve as much success as these Paul brothers have been able to achieve is through hard fucking work without exception. So you have to respect what Jake Paul has achieved and how he is able to get himself to the position of even being able to fight Ben Askren in the first place. And when you look at a guy like Jake Paul, you know, it's easy to disregard all the things that he's achieved, right? He's doing goofy dances, he's got flash cars, he's got girls, you know, he's playing the villain. But behind the scenes, he's got to be pretty smart to get to the point where, you know, he's even taking these fights, right? And you have to think about it logically. It's a big gamble for Jake Paul. If Jake Paul loses this fight to Ben Askren, you know, he's involved in online culture, meme culture. It'll be far more damaging to Jake Paul's career if he loses to Ben Askren than if Ben Askren loses, who can just go back to, you know, his wrestling schools, right? And it's not really going to affect Ben Askren. With Jake Paul, if he loses to Ben Askren, there's a lot at stake. And so I don't believe someone as smart as Jake Paul would take this fight unless they were very, very confident they would win. I mean, he called Ben Askren out in the first place. And what you've got to think is, for someone like Jake Paul that's built a massive, you know, $100 million empire from nothing, whatever he does, you know, whatever he applies himself to, that work ethic is going to help him become successful at it. So, you know, in the way that I don't think it's appropriate to completely disregard Ben Askren's striking, you know, after spending 8 or 9 years training under Duke Roufus, I also don't think it's acceptable to just completely dismiss everything that Jake Paul has achieved, because he has looked sharp in his last 2 fights. You can only beat what is put in front of you, and he's worked very, very hard to get to where he is in his young life, right? And at the end of the day, hard work is undefeated. And who knows, you know, really how Jake Paul is going to look this weekend. We have no idea. So, when we look at those two arguments, I feel what's really interesting about the two camps that the majority of people fall into is that I do think they're both right. I think that Ben Askren hasn't given us any reason in competitive fights to, you know, take his striking that seriously. Whereas we have, you know, seen Jake Paul look very sharp, but at the same time, we haven't seen Jake Paul tested against a proper fighter. You know, we've seen him fight Deji, Anisan Gibb, and Nate Robinson, but these guys aren't fighters. And what's very interesting about this fight is you have these two separate camps of people, but a lot of the people, you know, going into this matchup with strong opinions, refuse to see the other side of the coin. People that think Jake Paul is going to dance around Ben Askren, use superior technique and box Askren's face off, can't possibly accept that someone as slow and sloppy and basic as Askren striking could possibly cause Jake Paul, who's such a dynamic striker, a problem. And by the same token, you know, people can't see any way that a kid from Beverly Hills that does goofy dances and, you know, hangs around in nightclubs and talks a bunch of trash wearing crazy outfits could possibly cause a former Olympian a problem in any form of combat sport. But I do think both camps are right, and for that reason I strongly believe that this is a 50-50 fight. I could easily see Jake Paul going out there using his superior technique to box Askren's face off and put him away, because Askren won't have the skills to defend himself. He won't be able to tie, you know, Jake Paul up in the clinch and take breaks like he has in MMA, and this guy will just be a sitting duck to the knockout. But I can also see the other side of the coin, where Jake Paul has had it pretty easily up until, you know, this point in his career. We'll play some footage of his fight against Deji in the background. You know, we'll start from the third round. Actually, no, let's go a little bit earlier on. Let's go to the start of the second round. But I could also see the narrative where, you know, I could also see the narrative where people are dismissing all of the experience and knowledge Ben Askren has built up through a lifetime of competing at a high level. You know, Ben Askren has been an Olympian. He's won God knows how many accolades in wrestling. He's been a multiple promotion champion in ONE and Bellator, and up until he came to the UFC, was undefeated. That's not easy to do, and like George St. Pierre said, fighting is 90% mental. Ben Askren didn't achieve, you know, all these things from being the best wrestler. Ben Askren achieved these things from winning contests, and there is a certain amount of skill that goes into that. Toughness, the ability to composure, to be composed and remain calm when put in bad situations, the ability to think on the fly and figure out, you know, difficult situations that may pop up in a fight. It's heart, it's determination, and it's also cardio, right? I've followed Ben Askren's career. One of the things I can tell you about Ben Askren is he has legendary cardio. The guy never, ever, ever gets tired. He built a career off coming forward, putting a lot of pressure on his opponents and breaking them with pressure. And perhaps one of the reasons why Askren had so much success in his career was because the majority of fights in the second half of his career were 5-round title fights, which gave him longer to wear his opponents down. You know, quite often in Ben Askren's past fights, his opponents would do pretty well in the first half of those matchups, but as soon as he were able to wear them down, pressure them, force them to fight in an uncomfortable range, they would just start to fall apart. And what's very, very interesting about Jake Paul's first ever fight that we're watching here in the background against Deji is that he did slow down a lot as the fight goes on. If you go back and watch Jake Paul's fights against Anisan Gibb and also against Nate Robinson, you'll see that he comes out the gate very, very fast. Goes into attack mode straight away, fast hands, light on his feet, and looks very, very sharp. Exactly how he started this fight against Deji. But if you go back and watch this matchup, you can see that by the third or the fourth round of this fight, Jake Paul started to become a lot flatter. Was breathing heavy, his arms got heavy and tired, didn't look anywhere near as sharp. And this is a very, very, very significant factor to pay attention to, because remember what I said at the very beginning of this video. Ben Askren is pretty good defensively. I understand that he's slow. I understand that he doesn't have any power in his hands, but we haven't really seen Askren in that much trouble in his MMA fights against very, very high-level strikers. And I can tell you right now, I've been watching MMA for 20 years. I've been making money betting on MMA for 12 years, and I bet on MMA for a living. During those years, during the last 20 years, I have seen a trend play out over and over and over and over and over again, where you have these young, hungry bulls, these talented, young, skilled fighters like Jake Paul, and they get very, very confident from beating up, less skilled guys in training, very, very confident from some big wins, knocking guys out. It is good for the ego, right? You knock another man out and you feel invincible. But the trend that I have seen play out over and over and over and over again is these young, talented bulls have this meteoric rise, and then they run into a guy that doesn't go away. They run into a guy that they can light up with the 3, 4, 5 strike combinations that would have folded an Ethan Gibb or Nate Robinson. And when they light their opponent up, that's tough and experienced and has seen it all, done it all before, when they light him up, they land their best shots on him. And they take everything and smile, and they don't slow down. They keep coming forward. That is demoralizing for these young, technically gifted fighters. It's one of those things that really dents their confidence because, when you're fighting in a comfortable environment, in sparring with all your coaches and your trainers and your friends around you, and, when you're fighting these low-level guys, there's pressure, but there's nowhere near the same level of pressure as when you've talked so much shit. You've got the weight of the Triller promotion on your shoulders. You've got the weight to back up all the shit that you've talked. And obviously, you've got the weight of your career riding on your shoulders as well. We said it earlier on in the breakdown video. If Jake Paul loses to Ben Askren after all the shit that he's talked, with the culture that he's in, meme culture, internet culture, it's going to be very difficult for him. So now he's fighting under the bright lights of the boxing ring. It's a big fight. What happens when he throws everything he has at Ben Askren, gives Ben Askren his best shots, and Ben Askren just stands there smiling at him and continues to come forward and pump the jab? I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Jake Paul will be, the unicorn that is able to deal with that. He'll be experienced enough to calm himself down, compose himself, get his breathing under control, get his heart rate under control, and continue to perform at a very good level, and continue to be more technical than Ben, and continue to use his more superior boxing skills to outstrike Ben. Or maybe we'll see Jake fall into the trap that a lot of young fighters make who get overconfident, and he'll start to panic. And when you start to panic, you can't control your breathing, you can't control your heart rate, you get tired, your arms become heavy, you become sloppy, you stop thinking straight, and a guy like Ben Askren that's got a lifetime of experience at combat sports will know how to take advantage of that. If Ben Askren gets himself into a lot of trouble, finds himself in a lot of difficult positions early in this fight, he's not going to panic. He won't panic. He's been in bad positions before. We've seen him, knocked down and dumped on his head against Robbie Lawler, but he was composed enough, calm enough to weather that storm, come out the other end, and find a way to win. Now, obviously, he used his wrestling to beat Robbie Lawler, but the point is still the same. We have seen Askren put in bad positions against Alex Sakin, bad positions against Luis Santos, bad positions against Robbie Lawler. We've seen him weather storms and come out the other end stronger. He's got that composure, that experience to fight through adversity. We haven't seen Jake Paul react to being put in a bad position, and that's why I think there is a tremendous amount of value on Ben Askren here at underdog odds. If you're asking me who I think will win this fight, I honestly have no idea who's going to win this fight. I truly believe it's a 50-50 fight, but remember what I said at the very beginning of the video. In order to find strong positions to put your money, in order to find good bets, you have to look at the odds, look at the implied probability in the odds, and compare that with the likely possible outcomes to see, if either side of the bet is a strong position. So if we look at the fight, or if we look at the odds on Jake Paul, 1.55 minus 182 for an implied probability of 65%. Personally, with everything that we've discussed in this video, I don't know how you could give Jake Paul a better than 65% chance of winning this matchup. For me, there's no way you can bet Jake Paul here. But if we look at the odds on Ben Askren, currently around about a 2.60 underdog, which is plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. Based on everything that we've covered in this video, I believe it's more than fair to cap Askren at 50% here, which means if you take him at odds of 2.60, you're getting a 12% margin over the bookie. That's a pretty good, a pretty good margin to me. And the thing about Ben Askren is he understands combat sports, right? He's got that experience. Dana White has got that experience. Listen to what Dana White said in the interview about, it being a crazy concept that Jake Paul could beat a guy like Askren with so much experience. Jake Paul is expecting to come out here and absolutely smoke Ben Askren. He doesn't respect Ben Askren's skills. He calls him a bum. He is not expecting a dogfight. He's expecting to go out there and get Askren out in the first or second round. He's not expecting to have to go into the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh into deep waters where Askren's going to be looking to tie him up, jab his nose off, throw these short hooks to the body, which are going to take the wind out of Jake Paul's sails. And look at what Askren says here in the impulsive podcast that he did with Logan Paul. Just listen to what Ben Askren says.
A lot of people are going to have to stop doubting him. A lot of people are going to have to say, yo, he just beat someone who fights for a living. Now, you're not a boxer, but you definitely learned enough about how to strike through your training for MMA.
Yeah.
I believe beating you would give Jake Paul enough credibility to continue telling that story.
Sure. And so, I mean, we both wrestled, right? And so you could probably relate to this more. I mean, have you ever been at that tournament, right? And you see the kid kind of warming up, you're like, damn, he's kind of slick, and you watch him drill and you're like, wow, he's good.
Yes.
And then you see him out there and then all of a sudden he's in the match and it's not going his way and he just does it and he's not the same guy anymore, right? He's a different guy.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm expecting, to be honest. So listen,
I mean,
we're
Let me
gonna
translate this. Yo, pussy ass brother ain't gonna do shit, motherfucker.
Get him.
I'm trying to sell tickets, bro. No, I actually hear that.
Yeah.
Paint a picture for me.
So very, very interesting there how Ben Askren pretty much said exactly what we said could happen. And what was even more notable to me was how Logan Paul kind of acknowledged it, right? Throughout the whole episode of Impulsive, you should go check it out. Logan Paul was very dismissive of Askren's chances of beating Jake. Logan is one of these guys, naturally, because Jake is his brother, who thinks Jake's skills are going to be too much for Askren to deal with. But there he did kind of acknowledge, it was almost like an oh shit moment where Logan was like, damn, you may have a point there. We don't really know how Jake is going to react if you put him in bad positions and if he can't get you out of there early. Logan Paul, Mike Malak, Jake Paul, the narrative they're all coming into this fight with is that Jake Paul's going to smoke Askren and he doesn't stand a chance. What happens if Askren weathers that early storm? We haven't seen a lot of Askren striking offensively, but we do know he can weather an early storm with the best of them. So based on the current odds, I do think there's value on Askren this weekend. However, there are a few risk factors that we haven't spoken about that we do need to cover. The first risk factor being this is Askren's first fight back after a hip replacement. Now, I don't think this is going to be a major issue because, fighters that have hip replacements often talk about having better mobility and feeling better after they have a hip replaced. And on top of that, it's not like Askren's one of these guys that relies on speed, footwork, and mobility anyway. His edge here is going to be toughness, cardio, work rate, and fight IQ. So I don't think the hip replacement is going to be a huge issue for Askren in this fight, but it is major surgery and it is the first time we've seen Askren compete since having that surgery. On top of that, we've got to talk about age. Jake Paul, young, hungry bull, 25 years old, fire in the belly, ambitious, crazy motivated coming into this fight, looking to make a statement, whereas Ben Askren, if he loses, can go back to his wrestling schools with his beautiful wife, his beautiful children, and live happily ever after. Askren is 36 years old. There's a 12-year age gap, and youth matters. Combat sports, it's a young man's game. And with that 12-year age gap in the fight, what Jake Paul will lack in experience, he'll make up for in speed and athleticism. So that's definitely a risk factor for Askren too. The other risk factor that I think we could talk about coming into this fight is motivation, right? We've talked about Jake Paul having the weight of the world on his shoulders, to have to back up all the shit that he's talked. You know, the weight of carrying the Triller promotion, the weight of his career being at stake with how much shit he's going to take if he loses to Ben Askren. That's very, very motivating. You know, guys can break under that pressure, and perhaps Jake Paul will break under that pressure. But time and time again, these Paul brothers have shown that when the chips are down, they can perform on the big stage and they can come through and deliver. So Jake Paul's going to be crazy motivated coming into this fight. Ben Askren, I'm not so sure the motivation is going to be there. Askren has been quite open about the fact that he doesn't need to work another day in his life because he's made some pretty good investments. He's got his wrestling schools. He's okay financially. You know, he had that big deal with few fights in the UFC. I'm sure Askren's doing great. Also, boxing's not his thing. Askren's already said, you know, he's probably not going to fight again after this, right? He's going to go back to his wrestling school and live happily ever after, whereas Jake Paul is planning the Dylan Dennis fight, the fight with his brother, talking about fighting Conor McGregor. Jake Paul has got big plans in boxing. He's got big goals to achieve, whereas Askren is kind of taking this as a payday because he doesn't respect Jake Paul and he thinks it's going to be an easy night's work. So, motivation for Askren, that's definitely a risk factor as well. I would definitely say Jake Paul is going to be, you know, more motivated coming into this fight. Having said that, you know, a couple months back when they did that press conference, Jake Paul did respect Askren's wife and kids, and Askren did say in an interview with Vidal Riley that lit a fire under his ass. Ben Askren said, you know, up until that press conference, he wasn't really taking Jake Paul that seriously, but after he brought, you know, his wife and kids into the mix, that kind of lit a fire under Askren, and so who knows, you know, how seriously Askren's going to be taking this, you know, how he's going to be coming into this matchup, and what his intent is going to be, right? And then the final risk factor that we've got to take into consideration, which in my opinion is I mean, again, guys, let's seriously talk about this now, right? Let's seriously talk about this, right? This fight against Ben Askren is an 8-round fight. It's an 8-round fight. Okay, let's just talk about this before I go. Actually, let me just. I'll end on this note that I want to talk about. One more risk factor for betting Askren is the judging. It is the one I am most concerned about. We know that the boxing judging is very, very, very corrupt, right? If a fighter is very, very good for a promoter in terms of, you know, if a fighter winning is going to be very financially lucrative for a promoter, it is generally speaking very, very difficult to beat that fighter by decision. We know boxing judges are very corrupt. Time and time and time again, we see fights scored in favor of the fighter who is going to make the most money for the promoter. Now, the promoter for this event is called Triller, and they really are putting all their eggs in one basket on Jake Paul. It's almost like a partnership between Jake Paul and Triller to promote this fight, and if Askren does beat Jake Paul, it's going to be very, very bad for business, because you know if Jake Paul wins, he's already got his next opponent lined up, and these fights are bringing in huge paydays, huge paydays for Paul, huge paydays for Triller, right? You know, who knows if he could smoke Conor McGregor out of his hole and do a crazy big fight? You know, who knows how many rappers, you know, NFL stars, NBA stars, other YouTubers would want to take that big payday and fight Paul. Triller needs Jake Paul to win this weekend, and if the fight goes the decision because of that, I think it's going to be very difficult for Ben Askren to win a decision. Even if he wins decisively and dominantly, we know when it comes to these, you know, boxing fights, if it goes to the judges' scorecards, anything is possible. And so, you know, that is a huge risk factor here. And I do actually think, you know, we could see quite a lot of fuckery if this fight goes the distance. Now, having said that, I do think there is a reasonably good chance that that Ben Askren stops Jake Paul. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting Ben Askren to go out there, you know, one-shot KO Jake Paul dead like Jake did to Nate Robinson. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Askren doesn't have that kind of one-shot KO power. However, when we look at this fight, right? So this is the 4th round between Jake Paul and Deji. Look at how heavy Jake Paul's arms are in this fight. Doesn't have the same speed in his hands. Doesn't have the same pot in his shot. You know, he's a lot more sluggish. He's a lot slower. And remember that this is an 8-round fight against Ben Askren. So this would only be the halfway mark of the fight against Askren. And look at how flat Jake looks. And remember, this is against Deji, another YouTuber. You know, Ben Askren is going to be able to make Jake Paul work a hell of a lot harder than Deji. So if Jake Paul's slowing down in the 4th round against Deji, imagine what could happen against Ben Askren. And so, you know, I understand that this fight was back in 2018. I completely understand that Jake Paul will have improved exponentially since this fight. And with all the sparring sessions, the preparation he's done for his matchups against Anise and Gibb and also Nate Robinson, I'm sure that he will have done a lot better at pacing himself, composing himself, controlling his heart rate, controlling his breathing. You know, I'm sure that, you know, Jake Paul's cardio will be a lot better coming into this Askren fight, and he would have improved all aspects of his boxing. However, this is still only his 4th fight. He's only fought, you know, 2 YouTubers and a basketball player. Hasn't been forced to work as hard as Askren will make him work, and doesn't have a lot of experience of fighting tired in a real competitive environment. So, you know, if Jake Paul slowed down, you know, after 4 rounds against another YouTuber in Deji, you know, imagine what will happen if he slows down after 4 or 5 rounds against Askren, right? Those extra 2-3 rounds leading into the 8th round, it's going to be an eternity for Jake Paul, because even though Askren may not have that one-shot KO power to kill him dead, Askren can wear him down and stop him with body shots, jabs, volume strikes, right? So I do think there's a reasonably good chance Askren can get a stoppage late on here. So, hope you enjoyed that breakdown. That is it. I am definitely going to be betting Ben Askren this weekend at dog odds. In fact, I already bet him weeks ago. I'm not saying Ben Askren will win. I think this is a 50-50 fight, but in a 50-50 fight, if you can bet either fighter as a reasonably big underdog, you're putting your money in a strong position. So that's what I am going to do. Hopefully Askren comes through for us. Let me know what you think about this fight in the comments below. I love reading people's opinions on this matchup. Let me know what you think of this fight below. And if you want me to do more of these videos on, you know, other fights, maybe big fights in Bellator or the Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight, let me know what you think, guys. Let me know. Hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we can make some cash this weekend. Take care. I'll see you guys soon.